Hi, my name's Leonard and welcome back to the Cosmic DJ department for a very special feature on a new product out from Native Instruments. And it is this thing right here, the Traktor Kontrol F1. We're going to be taking you through all the features of this brand new controller, all the new things it can do. And before we get into that, we're actually going to talk a bit about what's changed in the new version of Traktor, which is version 2.5. So let's not waste any time, let's get straight down to talking about the software. So I'm primarily here to talk to you about this new controller, but there's some things that have changed in the software that we're going to need to deal with before we even get to the controller, otherwise it won't make a lot of sense. The primary thing that they have added to the software are the remix decks, which you can see down here. We can position them in any position, A, B, C or D, so any of the decks can become remix decks. And essentially what it is, it's kind of like having Ableton Live built into Traktor. So we can load samples in there and we can trigger them and we can modify them in a number of different ways. And you can see already that there's a few different applications for this. The first one, of course, is if you're playing with a normal 2 decks, like as if you were DJing and you wanted to add some extra samples to it. The second application is that you could actually play entirely live with this setup. So if we actually load 4 remix decks, we actually have an option of 64 samples per deck that we can trigger. Not all at once, we can load 4 from each deck at a time. So let's just have a look at what this looks like in the software. So this is a remix deck here, and what you'll notice we've got these 4 slots here, these 4 columns, and in each one you can actually see 4 samples that are loaded in. And there are 4 pages of this as well, so we've got a total of 64 samples per deck. Other than that, it looks pretty much like a normal deck, so we've still got a play button. There are a few new things down here if we drop down to have a look at the advanced settings. We've got a pitch control, we've got a gain control. We've got tempo so we can beat grid like we would a normal track, and we've got a few other things over here which don't really matter too much but are more relevant when you're using the controller. So that pretty much gets into it. The only other thing I'm going to say about Traktor 2.5 is that the beat gridding engine has been completely redone and it's absolutely fantastic now. So if you've had trouble beat gridding your tracks before, if Traktor's had a little bit of trouble detecting the beats for itself, give it another shot with 2.5. I guarantee it's much, much better. So let's get into talking about the controller next. So what is it? Well, essentially it is a controller that controls the remix decks that I've just showed you. That's pretty much all it does, so I really want to highlight here, it's a very important point to note that this is an add-on controller. It is not a standalone solution for Traktor. So if you want to use Traktor, you're either going to need some other forms of control such as timecode, or you're going to need Control S2 or S4 like I'm using here, or if you want to run with just an analog mixer and controllers, you would need an X1 or a pair of X1s if you wanted to control the 4 banks of effects that are available. So let's get into what we've got. So the build quality of this thing is absolutely fantastic, the same as all the other NI hardware on the market. It's exactly the same size as a Control X1, and it looks really great next to one as well. So if you've got an existing Traktor setup, then you'll know the quality of these devices. Let's break this down. What have we got on this controller? Well, there are basically 3 sections on it. We've got this top section here, which has 4 faders and 4 knobs. We've got a section in the middle here, which is basically a section full of buttons for actually modifying or doing different things with the sounds. And then at the bottom here, we have got a 16-pad grid, which we use to trigger the sounds, and they also have some other things, some dual features as well, in combination with other buttons on the machine. So the top section is pretty self-explanatory. We've got 4 knobs which are dedicated filter knobs and 4 faders which are dedicated volume faders. And these don't change function at all depending on what else we've done on the controller. They do the same thing all the time. So you'll notice on the software we have got these 4 columns, and each one of these faders will represent one of these columns. So you'll see if I move this fader up and down, that very small triangle moves up and down. That's representing the volume for this track. The filters, you'll see their blue line emerges once I start turning this. So if I move to the right, what we're getting is a high pass filter, and if I move to the left, what we're getting is a low pass filter. And if you're familiar with Traktor, then you'll recognize this from other hardware like the S4, and it's pretty much exactly the same, the standard filter that you would find in Traktor. So that section is relatively self-explanatory. It doesn't need a lot of detail, but it gets pretty intense once we move on down. So I'm going to skip the middle section just for now and just talk about this bottom section with the 16 pads, and we've got 4 buttons here at the bottom as well, which are used as stop buttons, or we can use them to mute as well. So if we want to actually load something from scratch, I've actually already got something loaded in here which I can delete. I'll come back to how to do this on the controller later on. So I've just unloaded that deck now, so there's nothing on it. So there are two ways that we can load information into the remix decks. We can actually load samples individually, which I will show you as well. So what I do here to get in, there's a blue button here which says browse. I hit that, and this actually then means that everything I'm doing is now going to be related to this browser. So if I wanted to pick a sample, it's very easy to either click the encoder. So we've got actually a endless rotary encoder that's also push button as well. So if I wanted to load a sample, I could just press it. Or if I wanted to specifically choose where I'm going to load that sample, all I need to do is pick a pad, like so. So now if I jump out of browse mode, I can trigger that sound back. And you can run through and do this with all of your samples, but what I'm going to do right now is I'm actually just going to load this pre-built set which I downloaded from the Native Instruments website. And that's another thing to mention as well. There are some really great remix sets already available online from the Native Instruments website. So if you're wanting to just have a play with the thing, just get to grips with it before you actually create your own sets, definitely go and download them. They're all different genres and styles, so there's something for everybody up there. So I'm going to re-enter browse mode. I'm going to scroll down here to remix sets. So you see I've downloaded a couple here, and we're going to load this one in. So very easy just to select it and click the encoder, and you'll see it's actually loading all those samples in. Now the push button encoder is actually a very useful thing. You use it in a number of different ways on this controller. I'm just going to show you quickly the pages. So as I mentioned before, we can hold 64 samples in here. So I've got 4 pages with 16 sounds in each page. So if I turn the encoder, you'll see I jump down to the 2nd page, 3rd page, and 4th page. So you'll see what you can really do here if you're actually going to be playing a set is you can really load as many samples in here as you're going to need, mostly for the whole set. And if you did need more samples, then you could actually create additional remix sets, which it's very easy to save as well. I'll show you that very quickly. If I want to actually save this set, all I need to do is pick it up from the title and drag it into my all remix sets crate there, or playlist. The other way to do it is if I drop down this little drop down menu on the deck here, I've got save remix set at the bottom. So very easy, and you can jump in here and actually label these as well. You can type in there whatever your name you want and then just save it, and it'll be then saved for you and accessible anytime you need it. So we've actually just had a look at how to load sounds into it. So what can we do with those sounds? Well, very easily, of course, we can trigger them. So there it is, and you'll see, you'll notice what just happened there is it's quantizing. So it's actually waiting for the first beat before it actually triggers the sample. So if I hit something out of time, it'll actually wait and it'll be quantized. We can actually change the value of this quantize as well. So at the moment I'm on 4 beats. So what that means is it's only going to trigger the sample once I hit the beginning of a bar. If I wanted to make this a little bit more narrow, we can do this on 1 beat. So you can get a bit more control over it, or it gets pretty fun if you actually take this right down. So what we're going to be now, we're in the 16ths, we're looking at 1/4 of a beat. So you can get a bit more creative with that. So I'm just going to stop all these sounds again. To stop things, we actually have 2 options. So if we have a sound playing, we can either just hit this stop button here. Well, it says stop, but it actually is a mute button. So you'll hear the sound has stopped, but if you actually look in the software, you'll see the little red line is still cycling along. So you can see that over here. If I actually want to stop the sample, you'll see it's actually still playing. I need to hold down Shift and press that button. It'll actually stop the sample completely. And then when I re-trigger it, it will go back to the beginning. So that's another really nifty feature. I'd like to talk a bit about the Shift button, and the Shift button is something that's really important. It does heaps of different things on this controller, and it's the way that we actually control a number of these different sections. So if I hold down Shift, you'll notice that everything changes on the 16-step, the 16 pad grid. What we've got here, it now refers to what's written down the side of each row as to what these will do. So we've got key lock, so we can actually lock the key of the sample, which actually then enables us to pitch shift it if we need to. If you have this turned off, all it will do is it'll behave like a normal sound would when you speed it up. It'll actually pitch up. So if we have all these turned on, it'll lock the key no matter what we do. We've got effects assign here, so this is to assign the effects to whatever the deck is running to. So you'll see here that I'm actually outputting here to both effect slots that I've got running. So if I have effects turned on, that means that particular column will output to the effects. We've got monitor here as well, so I can use this to send to the headphones, and this is particularly important if you're using a controller such as the S2 or the S4. If you're running this with an ordinary DJ mixer, it's not as important because you'd probably have this running into a separate channel that you'd be able to have a cue button on anyway. And finally, the other one we've got down here is a really cool feature called Punch, and if we have these turned on, I'll show you what this does briefly. So without it turned on, if I trigger a sample, every time I trigger a new sample, it'll jump back to the beginning. So you'll see that little red line always jumping back to the beginning. If I have Punch turned on, what it does is it assumes that I want the sound to, in the background, keep playing. So the little red line will continue to move along. It won't reset every time I press move to a new sound. So it actually gives you a bit more continuity with the sound that you're actually outputting. So that's essentially what we can do very simply in performance mode with this 16-step grid and these 4 mute buttons at the bottom. There's of course a whole lot more going on here, and most of it revolves around these buttons in the middle. So let's take a look at what we can do with them. So the first one is pretty obvious. It's a sync button, and you're probably going to want this to be turned on. This will enable all the things happening from your remix deck to sync with the tracks that you might be playing out of normal track decks. We've also got a shift function here as well, which is to set this as the master deck. Now, one particular recommendation I would make is if you're going to be mixing with sync enabled, probably let Traktor be the master tempo. So you do this in your clock settings here. So if you're actually playing with time code, you'd normally have this auto button switched on, which means that each deck will automatically switch over, depending which one has the most time left. So if we're mixing with sync enabled, we want to actually turn this off and let Traktor be the master clock. So that's the sync button. The next one along we've already looked at a little bit. We've got the quantize button. So if I hold this down, you'll notice 2 things. Firstly, I've got my digital display here, which is telling me that I'm actually quantizing to 1/4 of a beat. That's half a beat, and you'll tell that by the little dot at the top is telling me it's a fraction. So half beat, that's 1 beat. We've got 2, 4, 8, and 16. So that would actually quantize things to a 4-bar loop. So it can be pretty handy if you're primarily working with loops. We'll switch it back to 1. The other thing you'll notice as I'm moving this is the lights are actually changing on the controller. And what this relates to is on the screen you'll now see I've got those same values, 1/4, half, 1, 2, and so on. So if I want to jump to a quantized value, it's very easy to do it quickly by simply pressing a button. And this is particularly going to be useful for people that are using this as a real live tool and might be wanting to jump between playing a loop and then maybe drumming out some rhythms on this controller. So it's really great for that. There are a few other things we can do with that same button, and it relates to the shift states. So if I actually hold down shift and press edit, what I can do here is I can do things like copy. I can copy one sample to another spare slot. So all you need to do is select the sample that you want to copy, and then you would find, let's find another slot. These are all taken, but I'll put it in an obvious spot here. So I can paste it there, and now what's happened is I've actually duplicated that sample. You can do this as many times as you want. We've also got a cut mode, which is exactly the same as copy, except it'll remove the sample from the slot that you're choosing first and move it to the new one. We've got a couple of other really important things in this edit mode, and they are offset and nudge. So offset is really useful if you've got a sample in there that might have, say, an extra 16th note at the beginning before the sample kicks in, so you've got a little gap of silence. And what we can do with offset is by holding down a pad and turning the knob, it's actually moving the start position of the sample. So you can line this up perfectly so you don't get a gap at the beginning and therefore throw off your whole rhythm. Nudge is a similar idea, except it's a fraction of a beat. So it's a very, very small amount we're talking milliseconds here. And this is useful for if your sound is pretty much, it's already quantized, it's the right length, but it might just be ever so slightly out of time with the rest of your sound. So you can use that the same way, just hold down the pad and turn the encoder, and you'd listen to this back with your other sounds just to make sure that it's fitting in perfectly. So that's edit. The next thing along we've got is capture and delete. And this is what you saw me use at the very beginning. I actually held down these 2 buttons, and I could then move through, and I can delete things from either page. I can delete things from either page, or I can delete the whole set if I want to do that. Capture enables me to actually draw a sound straight from a track that I might be playing in one of my other decks. So to do that, all I need to do is hold down capture, and it's telling me on here at the moment it's capturing from B deck. And if I move the encoder, you'll see I can change to A, which is where I have one track loaded. I've got B, so I have another track loaded here. I've also got an option to record from the loop recorder, which is a feature I'm not going to go into today, but we have got a full video online of relating to Traktor Pro 2 when that came out, and that'll explain to you what the loop recorder is if you want to have a further look at that. Alright, so I'm going to show you just how to capture something briefly. So we hit the capture button. What we get on the screen here is a value which is representing the loop size. So you'll see if I actually move this knob from 4, 8, 16, 32, you'll see the actual number of beats are changing on my loop at the top here. So let's say I just want to capture 1 bar. Very easy, we select 4 as in 4 beats making 1 bar. Capture is illuminated. All we need to do is get the track playing, and we'll find a spot we wanted to grab that sample from. So let's say I want it to be right here. There it is, it's grabbed that sample now, so I can now stop this playing, and if I jump out of capture mode, there it is, so I've grabbed a sample from a track that I'm playing. So that gives you a third method for actually grabbing a sample. So we've looked at loading a set, we've looked at loading a sample from your library, and now we've looked at actually grabbing a sample live out of a track that you're already playing. And this can get really useful if you wanted to build up layers of textures with a track, or bring back hints of a track later on, or indeed have a hint of a track before the main track is brought in. So it gives you heaps of different options for actually working there. The next thing we've got is the reverse button, and this one's really cool as well, and it's a technique used really frequently in techno especially. So if we have a sample playing, all we need to do is hold down reverse. And this is actually a slip feature as well. So what's happening is, as I'm actually holding this down, the track is still playing, the sound is still playing in the background. And as soon as I release it, it jumps back to the position it would have been had I not actually used the reverse feature. There are a couple of things you can do here as well. So if we actually hold down reverse and release reverse before we release the pad, it'll actually keep playing in reverse. And then if we want to actually send it back to the normal direction, just really simple to bring it back, and off it goes again. So color is the second feature of the reverse button, and this is something that's really cool. So we actually have a choice of 16 colors, and we can color code our grid in any way that we want. So let's say I want to change the color of this pad. What I'm going to do is hit shift and reverse, which is actually changing the color. So I select the pad that I want to change the color of. So I'm going to pick, say, this pad that I'm working on. And let's say I want this one to be blue. We'll select blue. You'll see the pad's now gone back to blue. I can exit color. The other way we can do this very simply is to hold down the pad while we're in color mode and just turn the encoder, and you'll see that we can cycle through a number of different colors. So very, very easy to get any color that you want out of choice of 16. So there are a few other things here, and these get pretty important now. We've got this type section, and we can control a few different things from here. So let's get into it. We'll show you a few things. The first one I'm going to show you is the trigger mode. So I have a choice between gate and latch. At the moment, these are all set to latch, and what that means is when I hit a pad, it will just play through. The other option is gate, and then what that means is it'll only play back for as long as I have my finger on the pad. So I'll just show you how that works. So let's say we're going to turn this whole row here into gate mode, and we're going to exit. So if I play back the sample here, you'll see I just hit that once and that plays. If I was to do that here, you'll notice it stops playing. So I actually need to keep my finger down on it for that to play. And of course that one will play right through. So again, let's jump back in here. We'll change all those back. We've got a few other things we can do here as well. We've got sync feature. So you generally would want to have this turned on most of the time, unless you were using a sample that was not particularly reliant on tempo. And at the moment they're all turned on, so we're going to leave them that way. And that just means that all of these samples will actually sync to the clock source that we're using, which in this case is Traktor's internal clock. We've got playback mode, and this gives us a choice of two things. We can either have a one shot which runs straight through, or we can play in a loop, which means that it'll just continue to cycle. Once it gets to the end, it'll jump back to the beginning. So you'll see the icon changing here. So if I press it once, we've now got a straight arrow here, and that's just showing me that we're in one shot mode. And if I press it again, that's showing me we're in loop mode. The other mode here we've got is a gate override mode, and this just means that we can be, say, let's say we're playing a sample here. And if I wanted to jump into that, we're now in gate override. So it overrides any settings that I might have already in there. So everything is now in gate mode. And that's pretty much it for the type button. So the second feature of it is pitch. Now this relies on one thing happening, which is that we need to have key lock on. If you don't have key lock on, pitch won't do anything. So we have key lock enabled for all of these slots, and then I'm going to enter pitch mode, and then what we'll notice is if I just get a sound playing, we'll enter pitch mode. If I hold down a pad, you hear that I can actually now re-pitch. Now, if we actually find a sound so a sound like this, which is actually just a melodic sound, it's more appropriate for these type of sounds. So if you had a whole set loaded and only one sound was out of key with the rest of them, it's very easy to jump into pitch mode very quickly, select that sound, and we can re-pitch it to wherever we need it to go. So the next button on, we've got a few things we can do with the size and the speed of each sound. So let's have a look at how this works. So if we run into size mode here, and if I hold down a pad, you'll see that it comes up with a 1, so that's telling me that this is a normal size loop. And you'll see here if I actually turn the knob, so I've turned to 2, and you'll notice on the screen here that the actual size of the loop has doubled, and I've now got a big gap at the end. And I can also go the other way as well, so I can actually shrink this. If I actually get the sound playing, you'll hear what happens. So we'll go back into size mode again. So you'll hear the actual loop size is actually shrinking each time. So now I've actually only got 2 beats, I've got 4 beats. And then you'll notice what happens if I move to the other direction is I get this big gap at the end. So essentially where you'd use this is if you had a sample that was actually not cut to size properly, maybe there's a gap at the end of it, or maybe you don't want to play the whole loop, you only might want to play a sample of it. This is how you would actually resize your samples to fit. And the other thing we can do here, contrary to this, is speed. So if I jump into speed mode, which is the same button but with the shift held down, we'll jump into that. And this thing's pretty self-explanatory. So if I hold down the pad, I'm actually doubling the speed of it, quadrupling the speed, or we can actually halve the speed. So this is useful if you've got samples that are at the wrong speed and you need to either multiply them or divide them to fit the tempo of the music that you're working with. And the final button on there, which I've already gone into for the most part, is browse. So the second function of this is that we can actually use this as a normal MIDI controller. Now this controller is using a new special protocol designed by Native Instruments, which is apparently more efficient and effective than MIDI. So they say that it has a much higher resolution. So what we can actually also do is use this as a MIDI controller to control anything that we might want. This might be a second page of things that you can program to other features in Traktor, or it might be some other completely different software. You might want to use this as an Ableton controller. It'd probably make a great Ableton controller. So to do this, all we do is we hold down Shift and we hit Browse, and this jumps into MIDI mode that we can use for any number of other things. So we've been looking at Traktor 2.5 and of course this all new Kontrol F1 from Native Instruments. It's an awesome new product. These things are running out the door. So if you would like to know more information about them, please give us a call or come in and see us at either of our stores at Osborne Park or Cannington, or you can purchase them online at kosmic.com.au.